I'm mindful that there are a lot of people, and I'm not talking about white people, I'm talking about Black people. There are a lot of people who still believe that police are really important to their safety. And part of our work is actually to help them understand what safety means beyond policing. That like there's a lot of public education that has to go on. So when we poll people and ask them about defund, in a lot of places it's not popular amongst Black people. And that people, even when they want to invest in other things to police, they don't necessarily want to take the money away from policing, right? So I think that's a lot. And I think about Baltimore. Last year was the 6th year that we've had more than 300 homicides. So there are a lot of people who like are nervous about what will be the absence of police because we have not seen a lot of great alternatives in Black places, but that doesn't mean that it's not a good strategy. It means that like there are a lot of things that we have to put in place to make all of the strategies work.
Yeah, I tell you, brother, you are on top of this data, this analysis. It's a very, very impressive thing to sit here and listen to you and learn. But I want to put this hypothesis forward. Tell me what you think. I think the two sites where there has been an expansion of power beside police power is Wall Street power and Pentagon power.
Yes.
I
think the Pentagon is, I would put the Pentagon as a part of the police state. So I think I like.
Yes.
But Wall Street, I think you're right.
Yeah. So that the question then becomes, especially when we look at how difficult it is to make sure these police are accountable when they're mistreating Black people, especially Black young people, anybody, but especially Black young people, is how do we keep our analysis in place of the way in which the forces behind the police, which is still big money, which is still corporate power. That's why even the Democratic Party with corporate power at its center could play such a role in militarizing the police and been so hard on crime and tough on crime, within the 80s and 90s, all the way up till recently, until really the social movement set in that you and Netta and Tef, Poe and the others hitting the ground, Ashley and others hitting the ground with such power and courage. I mean, how do you hold on to that truth telling that connects police power to Wall Street power, to Pentagon power, and yet also recognize the lived experience of Black people, especially Black poor and working people, is such that they must have protection. There ain't no doubt about that. They've got to have safety and they got to have dignity.
Yeah, I think that's a good push. For me, I've been trying to think about what is actually the big question here. And I think about this, I think this is true of police and of prison. I don't think the question is police or no police. I think that framing is one that like is really hard for us to move in because people's conception of safety is both so rooted in it and there's so much propaganda around police that like people's imagination becomes constrained. I think the question is actually, it starts with sort of two beliefs. One is that there will always be conflict no matter what we do. We'll fix all the things. We'll like end poverty, in the military state, fix economics, so there will be conflict between people. And some of that conflict will result in harm. Like I believe those two things to be true. The question becomes who responds to conflict, who intervenes in harm. For a lot of people, the police is the natural answer. And what we would say is that the police is the easiest, simplest, and laziest response to those questions, not the best, right? So that like, what we would remind people is that you already have examples in your own life where there's a response to conflict that's not the police. There's a lot of conflict that happens in people's houses that like you don't need a police to respond to it. Do we need people with guns to respond to missing kids, to respond to car accidents, to respond to truancy? No, we don't. There are a whole set of conflict that like I can convince most people, you're like, somebody with a gun is actually like a bad response to that conflict, right? But I think that's actually the central question is like, who responds to conflict, who intervenes in harm? The police are just an easy answer for people. Same thing with prisons. I think the question is not like prison or no prison. I think that question is like a box for people. I think the question, again, starts from like, there'll be conflict, there'll be harm. And then it says, there's some people who believe that there's some harm so great, you should be separated from society, right? If you are somebody who harms children, you probably should not be around children. I think people would generally agree with that. The question becomes, how do we separate you? I think that the majority of us would agree that putting you in a cage is probably like not the way to do it, right?
Not the way to do it.
The
Yeah.
cage becomes the simplest, easiest, and laziest response to that question. It doesn't become the best response, right? So we should start thinking about like maybe restorative justice, maybe trust circles, maybe like there are a lot of ways that we can deal with this thrust to separate people from society, and that we can deal with like the the real life situations where it's like you can't be around this person, right? Like you can't, and there's not a conversation that's going to help you, or like you there's something that like you can't be around them, and how do we make that real and acknowledge that a cage is not the answer, right? I think that is actually like those are the two big questions for me.